You're listening to Life Check Yourself with life coach, transformational leader, and dating and relationship badass, Marni Batista. Every week, you'll get the raw truth from top experts and real people on the important life and love issues you want to know about. So, if you're ready to life check yourself in your relationships, your career, and the areas of your life that matter most to you, and you're not afraid to be called out on your, stuff, then you're ready for what's next.
Life Check Yourself with Dr. Colin Wilford. 10 ways to tell if you're compatible with your guy. Ladies, welcome to Life Check Yourself. We need a theme song. I am here today with Dr. Colin Wilford. You're going to love. He is a clinical psychologist with 27 years, although I'm looking at him right now and you would never know. In dating and relationship counseling. Colin has been always his whole life interested in how people think and behave, given their inherited resources and their unique set of circumstances. And he has been studying the mind personality dynamics, which I think is super interesting, the power of influence and leadership. And he turned all of that after he graduated from grad school and started his practice as a clinical psychologist. So I love when we get to have a former, a psychologist turned coach consultant.
Sure,
all right.
sure.
And now Colin brings his international and multicultural experience to challenging industries and helping leaders and companies resolve their current people concerns. And fun fact about Colin, you're a big athlete.
I used to be in my day, but I wouldn't say I'm a big athlete right now, but I try to stay healthy.
Well, I love that you do mountain biking and skiing as sports of your choice living in Utah. So I want to kind of get started today. Like when you think about the underlying theme in the work that you do, when you say helping people resolve their people concerns, what do you think is the deeper concern that people are having that is often the one that's not talked about, like the one underneath the surface?
That's such a good question, because what immediately comes to mind is firstly how we show up in the room. We're always very conscious about how we're coming across, how we are perceived by others. But just to get possibly closer to your question, I think we would desperately want to understand people better and know how to push the right buttons when we're connecting with people. And so for me, when I work with companies and individuals, both in relationships and in the sort of work environment, I commonly find this question coming up: how do I understand? How do I motivate? How do I get the best out of the people that I'm working with? And in a personal love relationship, how do I ensure that I'm understanding and meeting their needs as well? It's quite a broad question, but those are some of the things that are coming up in my mind as I interact with people.
Well, and this is really interesting because when I'm coaching people and talking to the women that we work with, and it's true, whether it's a love and dating or a professional, it's almost like they're not aware that they can inspire or create behaviors, right?
Yeah.
Or ways of being. And the question that I think I want to ask you around that is, when you're sort of looking, whether you're interested in a man or someone you're having a relationship with, or there's somebody at your in your career, or someone that you're on a board of directors, whatever it is you're doing.
Sure.
How do you I want to kind of go right to the root of it. How do you sort of like find what does motivate them? Like, how do you really get to know like how to read so and so this person?
So for me, it's all about passion. We got to understand what blows their hair back, is a term I like to use. So what is their passion? What gets them up in the morning? And when I have a conversation with any individual, I always try and get down to that as quickly as possible. So what do you enjoy? What do you do that gives you what we call flow, where you just kind of do it and get lost in time? whether it could be painting, reading, creating, it could be shopping, it could be anything, but we all have a passion for certain things. And unless we start asking those kind of questions, we very rarely understand what motivates people and what actually blows people's hair back, which is, sorry to use the term again, but
no, I love it. I think it's so great. And what's interesting is that most people who are listening, we don't think about like what's going on for the other person. We think like, how can I get what I want?
Yeah.
Right. How can I get someone to do something rather than wanting to know what will motivate them or inspire them to do this thing anyway?
It's like, what can I get for myself out of that relationship? Is that what you're referring to?
Well, yeah, right. Like I want something, so I need to make this person do something. And I think then that we get so focused on ourselves that we forget that this other person is like this human that, I read something. It said, all humans just want to be loved and belong, no matter who they are, right?
Sure, absolutely. Well, let's take a personal relationship and actually talk about a thought. I mean, the point you're making is very valid. If I'm in a relationship, what do I want? I want to get validated. I want to be told that I'm good enough. I want to feel like I am actually attractive to that person. I want to feel like I'm meeting whatever their needs are, to also kind of meet my needs at the same time. My need to be loved, my need to be accepted. So you're right that we kind of approach it very selfishly most of the time. But yet you'll find the individuals, and I'll be curious to know if you think the same way, but you find the individuals who do actually put themselves aside. And they do actually think more about the other person than they do about themselves. And I've been speaking to, a few individuals like this recently where they genuinely feel that way. And this one woman that I know very well, she genuinely thinks last about what she needs and thinks firstly about what do the others need? What does the person need that I have an interest in? What is going to be important to them? And it's just amazing to see different types of people interacting in potential relationships.
Well,
what their passion is. Yeah.
Well, right. And that's a great point, because you can go too far the other way too, right? Like all I care about is what makes you happy. So all of this kind of points to this idea of emotional intelligence.
Absolutely.
And when you think about, and it's defined so many different ways, and I'm curious in your work, how do you define it? Yeah, how do you define it?
There are four key pillars to the definition. First one is, how do I understand what I'm feeling and what my emotions are trying to teach me? Number two, how do I express that and how do I communicate my emotions? Number three, so that was two. Number three, do I understand the feelings and emotions of others? And number four, how do I manage, influence, and basically not control, but how do I guess influence is the right word, how others are feeling based on my understanding of what they're feeling. And I got an amazing story to illustrate that definition, if you got time to hear it.
I want to hear it. I was thinking of last night I'm in Hawaii. I was in a jacuzzi with some adult friends and my adult children, and I was I'm laughing while you're saying this because my friend, who's very smart and very self-aware, just said, I'm getting hangry, like I'm on the edge of hangry, and we have this plan to do dinner, and like I don't know if I like that plan. And we were talking about it last night in our family because it was like it was the first two that you said, right? Like I'm aware of my feelings and I can express it, but not being able to manage it or inspire or influence other people in the group. So it caused this big dramatic thing, which ultimately ended up, in the changing of the plan, and then, not whatever. And I love that one, because I know you're going to give me probably a deeper one, but I think that people think they're emotionally intelligent because they say like, oh, I'm having a feeling, I'm expressing it. And that's as far as it goes.
Yeah, it only stops with themselves. It only stops with connecting with what they're feeling and how they're going to express it, but they don't extend it to the other person.
Yeah, what's your story? It's probably so much better than the hangry man.
there's a few stories, but let me share one that I think illustrates all 4 points very clearly. So, true story, and obviously the story has to be true. There was this American martial arts expert who was going to an international competition. He was catching the train in Japan, where he was going to go to the event, and he was competing for a very, prestigious title. A few minutes into the journey, another, well, obviously Japanese people all around, but a Japanese man gets on, kind of a large character, a big guy. He was drunk. He starts to become abusive. He starts to shout at people, pushing people around, being rude, just being threatening. And naturally, a martial arts expert who has a lot of confidence in his ability, and being from the United States, would think, hey, I need to deal with this guy. I need to minimize the threat to everybody else on the train. So he gets up to go and obviously confront him. And naturally, if you look at his emotions, he is somewhat anxious, but certainly confident in what he has to go and do. And he acts on it. A small Japanese man who sees this grabs him by the arm and says, don't do anything, let me handle this. And so then he says, well, okay, but you're like half my size, what are you going to do?
Right.
So this little guy goes up to this big, drunk, abusive man and starts to talk to him. After literally 2 to 3 minutes, this big guy is sitting next to him and he's crying. And he's just bawling his eyes out.
Oh, my God.
If that's a term that you guys use here.
Yeah.
And he is talking. And this little guy is comforting him and just trying to reassure him. And so obviously this American guy goes and says, what is going on? What happened? He says, well, this guy just lost his job. His wife left him, and he is very distressed emotionally. I asked the right questions. I understood why he was angry, and now we are talking about it. And so if you look at the intelligence of that small Japanese man, he overcame his own anxiety. He's a small guy.
Right.
Confronts this big guy, acts on his impressions, asks him the right questions, understands the emotion of what's going on, and starts to help him understand that he is listening and is trying to help him resolve it. And so that's a very emotionally smart individual who could do that.
That's amazing. I wonder I would just be terrified. I'd be so terrified. I think that's so interesting. So go ahead. I kind of interrupted. Go ahead. So what's the point?
Well, just to add to that, there's another story of this super smart maths professor who I've just forgotten his name right now. So just the example came to my mind right now. But anyway, he comes home and apparently something happened between him and his wife. There was a heated exchange. He actually takes out a firearm and kills both him and her. And the big question is asked, there was so much intelligence, but there was no emotional intelligence. Mm-hmm. Because whatever news he was given or whatever he was dealing with, he couldn't manage his emotions. And he acted on that in a very destructive way. And so that's a classic example of high IQ, but very low EQ in that situation.
Yeah. And gosh, and it's just so, and I think all of those 3 stories are such a great example of like the continuum of like emotional intelligence. And I think I used to teach nursery school. So I used to work with like 4 and 5-year-olds, and like my basic job, thank you.
It's a tough job.
Thank you. But my basic job was to get them to say, how am I feeling?
Sure.
What do I want? Sure. And what do I need?
Yeah.
And how can I do it without pulling someone's hair or, knocking them over and validating it looks like you're really mad right now, Johnny. Right? But the thing is, I did that all day long, for years. And I think what happens is that for those of you who are listening, I'm telling this story because I think we have to go into this conversation with a ton of self-compassion. Yeah. Because nobody was taught that. We were, especially with women, we're so focused on getting the high IQ, right? About being success and achieving. And it's almost like this emotional intelligence piece has been like sort of muted from the conversation until recently. So if you're a grown-ass adult and you want to start to increase or build emotional intelligence, How do you start?
How do you do that? What do you do?
How do you start?
Well, the starting point is starting to what I call keeping an emotional record or a journal. It can be written, it can be mental, but you got to start connecting with what's going on inside of you. So that's the obvious place to start. Like, why am I anxious? Why am I frustrated? Why am I happy? What is exciting me right now? What did that person say that actually changed how I'm feeling? And so the starting point is just becoming aware of what is going on inside of you and how you are responding to whatever's going on around you. Secondly, just following those four pillars again, or those 4 steps. Well, what am I going to do about that now? How am I going to? Do I need to express that? Do I need to communicate that to somebody else? Do I need to talk about this, or can I just manage this on my own? And then, of course, we go through the next 2 steps, 3 and 4, which is, what about the emotions of others around me? I need to be more perceptive. I need to be more vigilant about what other people are experiencing. I mean, when you walk into an office or you walk into a room or a social event, are you actually noticing what other people are feeling? You might notice what they're doing, but are you noticing what they're feeling? And so that is a key thing to start practicing and to start, working on, and sort of recognizing around you, hey, that person looks really anxious, or that person looks really happy and really confident. Why is that person so quiet? Why do they look sad? I wonder what's going on.
I love that. And so like you're going to a social situation, if you're, whatever your goal is, or even the meeting at the big table at work, right? However it is. Yeah. And instead of just like being unconscious, basically, you're going and you're doing like an inventory sort of to take in the emotional read of the people in the room.
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. Absolutely. I love that idea.
It's like an emotional radar, or an emotional. I love the word reading. You said it well. An emotional reading of what's going on. And lastly, and here's the real challenge at improving your EQ. What am I going to do about that now? If I've noticed somebody that is quiet, that is seemingly anxious or seemingly down, should I go and speak to them? Should I go and connect with them? Should I go and actually just ask them how they're doing, or who are they? And so basically, if you just follow that model of what am I feeling, what am I going to do, what are others feeling, and what can I do to sort of try and engage, then I think you are definitely making huge strides forward in improving your own EQ.
Now, I love this. My next natural question, of course, is, so you're working on your emotional intelligence, you're following your work, you're doing this, and then the guy you're dating, or your partner, or your boss, or someone at work does not give 2 shits about any of this stuff. And they're not on the same EQ level. And because it's funny, I had a client who works in an organization, and her boss doesn't do his managerial roles. So every day at work, he's like, oh, I need to talk to, Jane about this thing going on. I'm going to do that today. And then as he walks out the door, he says to my client, oh, I didn't have time to talk to Jane about, that problem can you do that? Could you just do that for me? And she was like, how do I address with this guy? Like, I'm not getting paid to do his job, and I don't want to do his job, but he's a XYZ, this is how he reacts. What, because that happens all the time. I'm sure people are nodding their head. Don't nod and not drive. Drive. Sure. But what do you do in those situations, Colin?
Well, it's certainly a challenging one. And I'm thinking of an example of how I dealt with a similar situation. We had a guy here at the office who you just described. And so I found a moment where we were talking in the kind of gathering area there by the kitchen. It was just him and I. And I was, obviously being a psychologist, it's easier to sort of take the conversation in the right direction. But I started to talk to him about how he feels when he's confronted with stuff, or his anxieties, and what are his stresses, and how does he deal with his stress? Because we were talking about, like, what I like to do is go skiing, or I go mountain bike riding, or I do some physical exercise to deal with my stress.
Right.
And what does he do? So basically, if I'm answering your question, I just suggest or recommend that you connect and engage, and show the person, number one, that you're trying to understand how they're feeling and how they do things. And if there's an opportunity to make a suggestion on how they can do things differently, that is the ultimate goal. If you're trying to help somebody who you think doesn't give a shit about about anybody. So it's a hard one to answer because not everybody is ready to accept that kind of advice. But I always try and attempt to influence how they might think or how they might act.
Yeah, like find that one thing. I sort of was like thinking like this person is avoiding management because she said, this happens you're a manager. There's the people that work for you don't perform. So part of being a manager is you have to manage and give feedback and all of that. And so she was like saying, I think that he just does, like he actually underneath it all that he doesn't even like this job. He would prefer to just do the job and he got promoted or whatever it is. That happens all the time, right? And so going in with some empathy, right? Like, oh, it must be so frustrating. You come into work and there's this list of things you have to like deal with every day, and kind of going at it with that way. And I think it goes back to what you said at the start about like, even when we're in our own anger or frustration or dissatisfaction, like how can we start to have mutual understanding with the person?
Absolutely. And so that one of the big principles I teach in all of the leadership training that I do is about perspective. Do you have the right perspective? And, it's amazing how you can get 10 people looking at the same thing, the same object, the same situation, and everyone's interpretation or experience of that is different, based on their life experience, based on the trauma they might have been through, based on relationships they've had. They're going to see it differently. And if they can just be aware that their perspective might not be the only or the most correct perspective, then you're helping that manager be a far better person. And that is key in leadership and any kind of management role.
Yeah, right. Like really understanding that everyone sees the situation differently. And what's cool in your example about the martial arts expert in Japan is that's such a right. One person suffering in pain and anger. One person is wanting to take care of other people and or maybe demonstrate their ability, and the other person is like wants to understand, listen, and try and find the peaceful way to kind of do it. And then it'd be interesting. I wonder, is that like a study? I'm like, I want to read about that. I'm always wanting to like read like what the construct was of those things. Okay, let me ask you this thing. So we talk a lot about, I call it more of like spiritual, the pieces of emotions and emotional intelligence, but this existential piece, and especially now with everything that's been going on in this pandemic culture that we're living in. But, what should I be doing? Is this the right job for me? Is this the right relationship for me? Am I living in the right place?
Yeah.
How do you handle all of that?
Let me answer that in two different ways. The first is I want to speak about relationships for a second, if I can. I've been thinking a lot about what makes relationships successful and what is it that makes certain relationships compatible. What is the X factor? What is that? You speak about that spiritual sort of dynamic and connection. And it kind of ties into exactly what you're saying. And so a few months ago, I actually designed a tool which looks for compatibility and assesses compatibility between people that are starting to date.
Okay, great. I love it.
People that are starting to connect, starting to communicate. And online, obviously, there's a huge, and we'll come back to the pandemic thing in a minute, but there's a huge, and the pandemic caused it, didn't it? There's a huge connection with people online and social media, and they kind of, either they're single and they're trying to reach out and meet other people, or they are starting a relationship and they're not sure if this is going to be the right person for them. And anyway, so I used my experience and my understanding of human connection and compatibility and put together an assessment that looks at 10 key pillars, which actually makes up the word connections.
I love it.
But I've spelt it differently. So it's spelled CONXions. EX, and that's the X factor.
I love it.
SIONS. So it's connections, and it's basically each of those letters stands for a concept. And I can run through them quickly.
I'm like, come on, that's like the biggest tease ever. What are they?
So the C is communication, and it's coming back to this whole EQ thing. Can we actually connect? Can we talk? Can we express what we're feeling? And can we basically constructively express, even though we might be disagreeing or we might be annoyed or angry, can we communicate those thoughts and feelings to the other person? The second letter is O, which is others.
Okay.
And this is the empathy for others. And the feelings of others, or do we more care about ourselves and how we're feeling? So how much empathy and respect do we have for the other person is a key factor in a compatible relationship. The third thing is the big N here, which is narcissism. And every relationship has some kind of challenge, especially ones that have fallen apart and not been successful. That aspects of narcissism has come into that relationship.
Yeah.
Selfish, egocentric, controlling, trying to manipulate the other person. And so we measure that. We measure how much of that goes on in sort of love relationships. The fourth letter is E, which is emotional expression. So other than just communicating, coming back to the whole EQ thing, can we express what we're actually feeling? I mean, I might be frustrated with you,
right?
But I'm actually seriously angry about something. That's the deeper emotion, and can I really express that? I might appear to be irritated, but I'm actually highly angered and annoyed. I need to address that emotion. The fourth, and probably for me one of the most important ones, is the whole X factor thing.
Right.
So what is the X factor? Well, some of the questions are very straightforward, and it's about physical connection, intimacy, sexual attraction. It's about the whole sexual connection. But it's also about the emotional, spiritual connection that you just can't explain, but there's certainly there's a vibe that you two have that you understand and connect with each other, like having the same thoughts. Do we think the same thing sometimes?
Mm.
Do we, like if you are feeling distressed and I'm sitting 20 miles away at the office, can I sometimes feel that?
Right. Right.
Can I sometimes perceive that something is going on and I don't have you in front of me to see it, but I can feel it? And so that's touching on, I think, some of what you were saying a little bit earlier. So that's the X part. And then there's S for stress. How do I deal with stress? How do I deal with life's pressures? How do I manage when life is getting difficult? And when I look at relationships that fall apart, usually it's because somebody cannot handle the stresses of day-to-day life.
Right. Absolutely. I think
they cannot.
I think that's a huge piece.
And then I so this is the whole ConeXions word. I is for interests and hobbies.
Yeah. Okay.
Do we have similar interests? We don't have to have the same interests, but do we have similar interests that actually connect at the right times and at the right places? You don't have to have everything the same. You can have very separate interests. But as long as there's something that connects you, that is important for that relationship to work. Then we have the next O, which is optimism. You know how some people are just so grumpy and negative, and they're just pessimistic about everything?
Yes.
Well,
I'm married to a British person, so he's had the great American evolution.
Well, if he did the test, he would have maybe come up, to look at that area or not be so pessimistic about things. Anyway, so that's an important one, and there's just an energy about that. If you are always a downer and you're always looking at what's bad about this, you've got to change that. You've got to change how you do things. Then we have the N, which is needs. Now, this is just financial security. This is what I'm referring to. I mean, how often does money become an issue in relationship breakdowns?
Yeah, absolutely.
And last of all, we speak about spiritual. And this is why when you said the spiritual earlier, I wanted to just quickly tell you about this. And the spiritual attention here is, are you connecting with some spiritual need that you have or that the other person has, are you aligning spiritually with each other? It's not about religion, it's not about any particular faith, but it could be if that's what's important to you. But it's about whatever is important to you spiritually. Are you actually understanding, connecting, and respecting each other's spiritual journey? So those 10 things make up compatibility between people.
I was thinking about, of course, I'm like, oh, that's like, that really does encompass all the different things, because one of the pieces that's really important is in what you're talking about is it points to the things that create compatibility, and it also points to the things that allow you to come back to compatibility when there is a breakdown. And I always tell people, right, like at the beginning, it's easy to find compatibility with the right person, but the real, like, are we going to go for the long haul is all about like getting back to compatibility. So I love that. And ladies, you can go in the show notes, ConeXions.com, and you could take the assessment. So make sure you check that out with your honey, with your boo. Do you recommend that you take this like at the beginning, or do you think you take it after a while? Like when do people take this thing?
So it is actually designed for the earlier the better. However, I've used this assessment and tested it out on people that have been in long-term relationships, and it's amazing how how the stuff comes out that they already know about, but it is picking up that there's an issue in one or two or three of those 10 areas. It was originally designed for people that are starting to date and starting to get to know someone, so we can kind of bypass all the nonsense of, oh, you look great, you look pretty, you look wonderful, you look handsome. All that stuff's nice, but it doesn't make a relationship work, long term.
That, you probably don't know this about me, but I'm a reality TV sort of junkie. And so one of my friends said, you got to watch this dating show called Are You the One? And it's old. So I only got through like 40 minutes of one episode from like 2015 because I just couldn't. But the whole concept was that they have been matched, but there are these people that come to this place, whatever, resort, whatever, and they've been matched by a matchmaker, that they're the compatible ones, and they have to like sort through each other to try and find their match. And I was like, wow, that's such a great idea, because at the beginning they're all obviously only going on like pheromones and hormones.
Exactly.
Right? And they get totally
I think that's love. I think that is compatible. I mean, we are physically, sexually attracted. Is that really the only it's not the only thing that makes a relationship? Of course not. I mean, you have to have so much more than that. You
do. And I love that this breaks this down. You're so good at like breaking things down into pieces, right? And then you just like take the piece and you're like, yes, no, this is where I need to work on this. This is what I need to do.
Let's focus on this piece.
Yeah.
And so what I do in this process, I take two people's results and I do a comparative analysis of, well, are you connecting on that level or are you disconnected? And what do we need to do about that? So, it's very constructive and very sort of helpful in terms of new, old, intermediate relationships. What do we need to do to either walk away from this or to make this work? And these are the areas to focus on.
And I love that you said, what do we do to need to make it work? Because let's say you have, some of those are really strong and the other ones aren't. Yeah. And so I think so many people right now we're in the buffet of dating. Like, oh, I'll just, had a nibble. I'll just go back to the buffet. And I think that one of the biggest ways people sabotage their love life is that they're so picky. They're not discerning. They're picky. And what I love about what you're doing is that it allows you to be discerning and then say, like, do we have enough of those other strengths to work through? Real. Yeah, to work through. Real. Because, and I say this probably once a month on this show, but I love this stat from the Gottman Institute. 69% of a couple's, problems are perpetual, right? So you're going to obviously have to work through shit, right? So what you're kind of looking at is, well, how can we like equip ourselves, right, to really go through that? Okay, my last question for you, because I think since you're so good at like breaking things down to the simple,
pressure.
Yeah, I know the question. So if you were going to say to someone who's having, because I think women are like, oh, I have all this information, but then I get super triggered and I have these really big feelings and my amygdala takes over and I shut down or I walk away or I scream or whatever it is. While you're building your emotional intelligence, how can you take a step forward in the bigness of it when it's happening so that you don't have a lot of damage, collateral damage on the way?
I love that question. It's amazing how the amygdala is only the size of your sort of pinky nail, and it controls everything in terms of what we feel, and what we feel is what we do. Every action is preceded by an emotion, and this is what I'm leading up to in terms of what we do. So whenever I help anyone trying to raise their level of EQ and raise their ability to act constructively and smartly, the number one thing is connect with the emotion and then consider the options. So let me step aside. An animal has no time between a stimulus and a response. If you hit a lion with a stick, he's going to take you out. He's not going to think about it. Human beings have this wonderful privilege of receiving the stimulus and then having time to think about, what am I supposed to do? And why is that person doing that? So for me, to try and answer your question, if you can just increase the time between what is triggering you and what you believe you need to do in that situation based on your perception, based on your understanding, and based on what you think should be the best result, you are making huge progress in increasing and improving your EQ. And so that is the key. Just increase the time. We all act, well, not all, but a lot of us act impulsively. We react, we knee-jerk react, and it's usually destructive. It's usually gonna damage some stuff.
Absolutely.
But if we're able to increase that time and just take a step back and spend a bit more time with perceiving and analyzing, and now what do we do about this? That is the key to becoming emotionally smarter. It's so tough though when you're in the moment, because you're angry and you're frustrated and you want to just hit the person, or you want to scream and shout. But don't be an animal. Be a human being that thinks.
I love that. See, Dr. Colin, making it real, right? Don't be an animal. I think that's so good. So for 2022, I really want to make my pauses bigger. Like what I've been doing is just like letting the feeling. I close my eyes and I'm like, just let it go through just me.
Sit with it.
Breathe.
Sit with it.
Yeah, my husband's like, oh no, she's closing her eyes. She's having a feeling.
Best you walk away and go hide somewhere.
Exactly. I'm just like, woo! I need a moment. But it's great, right? And so that's what I want to do in 2022. Is I want to create bigger. I want to be less of an animal, more of a human. In 2022.
I like your term, just sort of making bigger pauses, because that if you take a moment to pause and just think and perceive, you become a far wiser, smarter, emotionally intelligent human being.
To the great pause with Dr. Colin. Thank you so much for being here. I love this. And because you have so many steps, you have so many options, ladies, of how you can, and I'm going to say it. And by the way, find out more about Dr. Colin Wilford in the show notes. There are so many things. Check out that ConeXions.com for sure. But whatever you do, I'm going to tell you to life check yourself. We'll see you next time in bed. Bye-bye. Hey, thanks for tuning into today's show. So if being in an intimate relationship in which you feel 100% seen, heard, and accepted by a high caliber man is a priority for you right now, and you're interested in seeing if you're a fit for working with me and my team at Dating with Dignity, here's what I want you to do. Just head over to DWD VIP, that's D as in dating, W, D as in dating, VIP.com, and book a call to speak with my team. We'll get on the phone with you for about 60 minutes and you'll get crystal clear on what's stopping you from finding true love right now. We'll also take a look at what you want to create, what you want your whole life to look like when you're able to finally be fully expressed as a woman in a healthy relationship with an incredible guy. And if we can help you get from where you are right now to where you want to be, we will show you the fastest path possible that makes sense for you to do that.
We help smart, successful women all over the world solve this one missing piece in their life so they can finally have it all. So to see if we can help you do the same thing, head over to dwdvip.com. I'm Marni Batista, and let's talk soon.